Daniel Petrick. On October 20th, 2007, emergency responders in Wellington, Ohio, were called to a residence where two individuals had been shot. When police arrived, they found Mark Petrick with a head injury and his wife Susan with fatal wounds. Their son Daniel was present at the scene and initially told arriving family members that his parents had been in a fight. However, inconsistencies in his account quickly raised suspicions among investigators. The investigation began with the physical evidence at the scene. A 9mm handgun was found placed in Mark Petrick's hand, positioned in a way that suggested an attempt to stage the incident as something other than what had occurred. Forensic analysis of gunshot residue, blood spatter patterns, and the positioning of the weapon indicated the scene had been manipulated after the shooting. When questioned more thoroughly, Daniel's story began to unravel. Daniel eventually acknowledged his involvement, explaining that he had taken the firearm from his father's locked safe. He told investigators he approached his parents while they were seated on the couch and asked them to close their eyes for a surprise. After they complied, he fired at both of them. Susan sustained multiple wounds and did not survive, while Mark was struck in the head but managed to survive the injury. Following the shooting, Daniel attempted to make the scene appear as though Mark had been responsible. The background investigation revealed significant context. Daniel had experienced a skiing injury that resulted in a serious infection, confining him to the home for recovery. During this time, he developed an intense interest in video games, particularly the Halo series, reportedly spending up to 18 hours daily playing. His parents grew concerned about the amount of time devoted to gaming. Approximately 1 week before the shooting, Mark discovered that Daniel had secretly purchased Halo 3. Mark confiscated the game and the gaming console, placing them in the locked safe, where he also stored his firearms. This confiscation occurred within the context of the Petrick family's religious values. The trial in December 2008 focused on Daniel's state of mind. Defense attorneys argued that his extensive gaming had created a distorted perception of reality. Psychiatric experts testified about the potential effects of extended gaming sessions on adolescent brain development. Prosecutors presented a different perspective, arguing that Daniel's actions demonstrated awareness and planning. The fact that he accessed the locked safe, retrieved the weapon, and attempted to stage the scene suggested deliberate choices. The jury convicted him on charges including aggravated homicide, attempted homicide, and tampering with evidence. Mark Petrick testified during the proceedings, expressing that Daniel still did not fully comprehend the gravity of what had occurred. Despite losing his wife, Mark demonstrated compassion toward his son, stating that he had forgiven him. The sentencing phase resulted in Daniel receiving a term of 23 years to life imprisonment. He is currently incarcerated at Grafton Correctional Institution in Ohio and will become eligible for parole consideration in 2030. Mark has maintained contact with his son, and Daniel has reportedly expressed remorse. While this case involved a teenager acting alone, the next situation would reveal how peer dynamics could lead to an equally devastating outcome. Derek King and Alex King. In late November 2001, fire departments in Pensacola, Florida, responded to a house fire where the body of Terry King was discovered. The 40-year-old man had been found deceased in his home, and initial examination revealed injuries that preceded the fire. Investigators determined the blaze had been set intentionally, raising immediate questions about whether this was an attempt to cover up what had actually occurred to Terry. The investigation quickly focused on Terry's two sons, Derek and Alex King, who were not found at the residence. Law enforcement located the brothers at the home of Ricky Chavez, a family acquaintance, approximately 48 hours after the fire. When questioned, the youths initially provided accounts suggesting Chavez had been responsible for their father's passing. But further interrogation revealed inconsistencies that prompted investigators to look more closely at the brothers themselves. Forensic evidence at the scene indicated Terry had sustained blunt force trauma from a baseball bat before the fire was set. Blood spatter patterns and the location of injuries suggested he had been struck multiple times while in bed. The positioning of his body and the fire's origin point indicated someone had attempted to destroy evidence after the initial incident. This led detectives to re-examine the timeline and the brothers' movements that night. Under continued questioning, Derek and Alex eventually acknowledged their involvement in their father's passing. They explained they had struck him with a baseball bat while he slept, then attempted to conceal what had happened by setting the house on fire. The brothers stated they had then gone to stay with Chavez, who they claimed was unaware of what had occurred until later. This version of events would become contested as the case developed. The investigation into motivation revealed a complicated family situation. Terry King had been raising his sons as a single father after their mother left. Witnesses reported that Terry maintained strict household rules. The brothers told investigators they felt unhappy with the restrictions and wanted to live with Chavez instead. Ricky Chavez became a central figure as investigators examined his relationship with the family. He was significantly older than the boys and had developed a close relationship with them. Prosecutors argued that Chavez had manipulated the brothers, while defense attorneys suggested Chavez had been more directly involved than he admitted. Chavez was ultimately convicted of being an accessory. The legal proceedings involved complex considerations about trying the brothers as adults despite their young ages. Both Derek and Alex were initially convicted and received significant sentences, but these verdicts were later overturned on appeal due to concerns about how the trials were conducted. The case was eventually resolved through plea agreements that resulted in substantially reduced sentences compared to the original convictions. Derek received 8 years and Alex received 7 years as part of the negotiated resolution. Both were released after serving their terms, with Derek being released in 2009 and Alex in 2008. The case prompted discussions about appropriate sentencing for young offenders and the role of adult influences in juvenile decision-making. Following their releases, both brothers faced challenges reintegrating into society. Derek was arrested in 2011 for possession of firearms, a violation of his release conditions. Alex attempted to maintain a lower profile, but struggled with the lasting impact of the case. Tragically, reports indicate Alex passed away in 2024. Derek's current circumstances remain largely private. From a case involving brothers and outside influence, the next tragedy would stem from tensions within a single household that escalated to an unimaginable outcome. David Braum. On the morning of February 18, 1988, authorities in Rochester, Minnesota received reports of a family that had not been seen or heard from in concerning circumstances. Officers conducting a welfare check at the Braum residence discovered a scene that would shock the community. 4 members of the family had been found deceased inside the home, each having sustained severe trauma. The victims were identified as Bernard Braum, his wife Paulette, and 2 of their offspring, Diane and Richard. Forensic examination revealed all 4 had been struck with an axe, with the attacks occurring during the early morning hours. The brutality of the scene and the fact that the entire family except one member had been targeted led investigators to immediately search for the missing son, David Braum. David was located later that day, and his clothing showed evidence connecting him to the scene. When questioned, he acknowledged responsibility for what had occurred, explaining that he and his father had been engaged in an ongoing dispute about his future plans. According to his statements, the conflict had escalated the previous evening, and he had taken the axe from the family's garage during the night. However, his account provided limited explanation for why the confrontation had expanded to include other family members who were not part of the original disagreement. The investigation into David's background revealed a teenager who had generally functioned well in school and community activities. Friends expressed shock at what had occurred. The relationship between David and his father was characterized by some as tense, with Bernard holding traditional views that David appeared to resist. The evening before the incident, witnesses reported that David had been at school activities and appeared normal. The dispute with his father apparently occurred after he returned home that night. The specific content of their argument remained unclear, though it appeared to center on David's intentions regarding his education. Psychiatric evaluations examined David's mental state. Experts testified about adolescent brain development and impulse control. However, the premeditated aspects suggested a level of deliberation that complicated any defense based on impaired judgment. The trial resulted in conviction on multiple counts, and David received 3 consecutive life sentences for his actions. He was incarcerated in Minnesota correctional facilities where he served more than 3 decades. During his imprisonment, reports indicated he participated in available programs and maintained generally compliant behavior. His case became a point of reference in discussions about appropriate sentences for crimes committed by juveniles. In a development that drew significant attention, David Brahm was approved for work release in July 2025. This decision came after parole board review of his institutional record and assessments of his current risk level. The move generated controversy, with some community members expressing concern about public safety, while others noted the amount of time served and principles of rehabilitation for offenders who committed crimes as juveniles. The work release conditions include strict supervision requirements and limitations on movement and activities. David's transition back into the community remains closely monitored, with any violations potentially resulting in return to full custody. The long-term outcome of his reintegration will likely inform future decisions about similar cases involving juveniles who received lengthy sentences. The case raised enduring questions about how family conflicts escalate and whether intervention points existed that might have prevented the tragedy. Mental health professionals emphasize the importance of resources for families experiencing significant tension, particularly when adolescents and parents find themselves in seemingly irreconcilable disagreements about important life decisions. While David's case involved family conflict, the next situation would demonstrate how physical actions, initially portrayed as accidental, could prove to be something far different. Lionel Tate. In July 1999, emergency services in Pembroke Park, Florida, responded to a residence where a young girl was reported to be unconscious. When paramedics arrived, they found Tiffany Unick unresponsive with severe injuries. Despite immediate medical intervention, she could not be revived. The circumstances leading to her condition would become the subject of extensive investigation and legal proceedings. Tiffany had been in the care of Kathleen Grosset Tate, who was providing supervision while Tiffany's mother worked an evening shift. Kathleen's son Lionel had been present in the home, and initial reports suggested Tiffany's injuries resulted from the two engaging in play that had become too rough. However, medical examination revealed injuries far more severe than what would typically result from accidental contact during play between two young people. Forensic pathologists documented extensive trauma, including a fractured skull, brain injuries, broken ribs, and internal bleeding. The nature of injuries indicated she had been subjected to significant force over an extended period. These findings led investigators to question whether the incident had truly been accidental. Lionel initially maintained that he and Tiffany had been imitating professional wrestling moves. His account suggested they had been playing and that Tiffany's injuries were unintended. However, the severity raised serious doubts about this explanation. The legal proceedings became notable for several reasons. Lionel was charged and tried as an adult despite being 12 years old, making him one of the youngest in Florida history to face such proceedings. Defense attorneys maintained that he lacked the maturity and intent required for the charges. The trial in January 2001 resulted in conviction, and Lionel received a sentence of life imprisonment without possibility of parole. This outcome sparked intense debate about the appropriateness of such a sentence for someone so young, with critics arguing that the punishment failed to account for developmental factors and rehabilitation potential. The case drew national attention to questions about trying juveniles as adults and the purposes of the justice system in cases involving young offenders. In 2004, Lionel's conviction was overturned on appeal due to concerns about his competency evaluation and other procedural issues. He was offered a plea agreement that would result in a substantially reduced sentence, which he accepted. Under the terms of the plea, he acknowledged culpable negligence rather than intentional harm and received a sentence of time served plus probation. His release came with strict conditions regarding behavior and supervision. Unfortunately, Lionel's time outside custody was marked by additional legal difficulties. He was arrested for multiple violations, including robbery and weapons possession, leading to new convictions and sentences. These subsequent offenses complicated discussions about his original case and whether the initial resolution had been appropriate. He is currently serving time for these later convictions. The case prompted ongoing debates about media influence on young people, particularly regarding violent content in wrestling programs and other entertainment. Experts noted that while many young people watch similar content without harmful outcomes, certain individuals may be more susceptible to imitating dangerous behaviors. The tragedy also highlighted the importance of adequate supervision when young people are in care situations. Tiffany's mother has spoken publicly about the loss and the justice system's handling of the case, expressing that no outcome could restore her daughter, but hoping that lessons might be learned about protecting vulnerable individuals. The intersection of accident versus intent, appropriate culpability for young offenders, and the role of environmental factors continues to make this case a reference point in juvenile justice discussions. From questions about intent and media influence, attention would shift to a case where intent became impossible to deny due to the nature of the actions taken. Mackenzie Sherilla. On July 31, 2022, emergency responders in Strongsville, Ohio, were called to a serious vehicle collision where a car had struck a brick building at extremely high speed. The impact was so severe that the vehicle was demolished, and the two passengers inside sustained fatal injuries. The driver, Mackenzie Sherilla, survived the crash with injuries, but remained conscious. The circumstances of the collision would lead to one of the most unusual cases in recent Ohio history. Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan were pronounced deceased at the scene. Forensic reconstruction of the crash indicated the vehicle had been traveling at approximately 100 miles per hour when it struck the building. Investigators noted there were no skid marks, suggesting the driver had attempted to brake before impact, and the trajectory showed the vehicle had been aimed directly at the structure rather than losing control and striking it accidentally. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses provided crucial evidence. Video recordings showed the vehicle approaching the building at high speed on a direct path with no apparent attempt to turn or stop. The footage contradicted any suggestion that the crash had resulted from driver error, mechanical failure, or loss of control. Instead, it appeared the collision had been deliberate, raising the question of why someone would intentionally cause such an incident. Investigation into the relationships revealed that Mackenzie and Dominic had been in a romantic relationship that friends characterized as tumultuous. Witnesses described a pattern of arguments and reconciliations. Davion had been a friend to both, and his presence appeared to have been incidental. Text messages and social media posts provided additional context. Communication suggested she had been experiencing emotional distress related to the relationship. However, the fact that passengers were in the vehicle raised questions about her consideration for their lives. The legal proceedings centered on whether Mackenzie's actions constituted intentional harm despite her own injuries. Prosecutors argued that the evidence clearly demonstrated deliberate intent. Defense attorneys suggested that if she had intended to cause deaths, she would have positioned herself differently. The trial judge reviewed the extensive video evidence and forensic analysis before delivering a verdict. Judge Nancy Margaret Russo described Mackenzie as having driven with the intent to end lives, rejecting the defense's arguments about mental state. The verdict of guilty on multiple counts reflected the court's conclusion that this was not an accident or even reckless behavior, but a calculated action with fatal consequences. Mackenzie Sherilla received 2 concurrent life sentences with eligibility for parole after 15 years. She is currently incarcerated and will become eligible for parole consideration in 2038. The families of Dominic and Davion provided impact statements describing the permanent loss they experienced and the senselessness of how their loved ones' lives ended, while Mackenzie's actions involved a vehicle as the method. The next case would demonstrate how planned actions during a seemingly unrelated incident could lead to a tragic discovery. Scott Deleski. In October 2005, authorities in Lafayette, California, responded to a residence where Pamela Vitale had been found deceased with severe head trauma. The 52-year-old woman was the wife of prominent attorney Daniel Horowitz, and the discovery occurred when Daniel returned home from work. The brutal nature of the attack and the apparent lack of clear motive made this a perplexing case for investigators to unravel. Forensic examination revealed Pamela had sustained more than 40 blows to the head and face. Delivered with significant force, a piece of crown molding from the home had been used as the weapon. Additionally, investigators noted that a symbol had been carved into her back after her passing, suggesting the perpetrator had spent time at the scene beyond what would have been necessary for robbery. The residence showed signs of disturbance consistent with someone searching for items, but valuable property remained, indicating theft may not have been the primary motive. The investigation faced initial challenges due to the lack of obvious suspects. Detectives conducted extensive interviews and began examining forensic evidence, including DNA. A crucial break came when DNA analysis matched material found at the residence to Scott Deleski, a teenager who lived nearby. When investigators interviewed Scott, he initially denied involvement, but eventually acknowledged having been at the residence. He claimed he had gone there to retrieve package delivery materials, explaining this was related to a credit card scheme. According to his account, Pamela discovered him, leading to a confrontation. The prosecution presented a different theory. Evidence suggested Scott had been researching criminal techniques and had planned the entry. The credit card scheme prosecutors alleged was supposedly his motivation for entering homes to steal identity documents. The nature of the injuries and the time Scott had spent at the scene suggested this was more than a spontaneous reaction to being discovered. Investigators presented evidence that Scott had methodically attacked Pamela and then engaged in post-mortem actions, including the carving of the symbol. Psychiatric experts who evaluated him described concerning patterns in his thinking and interests, though opinions differed on whether these indicated a diagnosable mental illness or simply troubling personality traits. Scott's background revealed a young person who had been involved in various alternative lifestyle choices common in the counterculture community where he lived. Friends described him as intelligent, but sometimes displaying unusual interests and behaviors. His academic performance had been uneven, and there were indications of experimentation with substances and engagement with dark themes in his personal writings and internet searches. The trial in 2006 drew significant media attention, given the victim's prominent husband and the defendant's young age. Scott was convicted on charges including first-degree offense and was sentenced to 25 years to life imprisonment. The conviction reflected the jury's conclusion that the evidence supported premeditated actions rather than a spontaneous reaction to being discovered during a burglary. Scott DEADLIEST is currently incarcerated in a California facility and will become eligible for parole consideration in 2030. His case has been cited in discussions about how seemingly minor criminal activities like credit card fraud can escalate when circumstances change unexpectedly. The tragedy also highlighted how individuals living in close proximity can be completely unaware of potential dangers posed by neighbors. Daniel Horowitz has spoken publicly about the loss of his wife and the impact on his life, describing the randomness of how she became a victim simply by being home when someone chose to enter their residence unlawfully. The case served as a reminder that even in seemingly safe suburban communities, unforeseen dangers can emerge from unexpected sources. If you've made it this far and enjoyed deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. While Scott's case involved an encounter with a stranger during a planned intrusion, the next tragedy would emerge from within a close friendship that concealed growing tensions. Rachel Schoaf and Sheila Eddy. On July 6, 2012, 16-year-old Skylar Neese was reported missing from her home in Star City, West Virginia. Her parents discovered she had apparently climbed out of her bedroom window during the night, as evidenced by a surveillance camera that captured her leaving voluntarily around midnight. She had been seen getting into a vehicle, but the grainy footage made identifying the car or its occupants difficult. What initially appeared to be a runaway situation would evolve into something far more disturbing. The investigation began with interviews of Skylar's friends and classmates to establish her recent activities and state of mind. Rachel Schoaf and Sheila Eddy, both close friends of Skylar, told investigators they had picked her up that night to drive around together. According to their initial accounts, they had dropped Skylar off at the end of her street around 11:30, contradicting the surveillance footage showing her leaving later. This discrepancy, along with other inconsistencies in their statements, made them persons of interest as the search continued. For months, the case remained unsolved despite extensive searches of the area. Skylar's parents maintained active public appeals for information while investigators continued examining evidence and re-interviewing witnesses. The two friends participated in these appeals, with both expressing concern about Skylar's disappearance on social media and in media interviews. Their apparent distress seemed genuine to observers unfamiliar with the true circumstances. In January 2013, approximately 6 months after Skylar disappeared, Rachel Schoaf informed her attorney that she wanted to confess her involvement in Skylar's passing. The confession came after she had been admitted to a facility for treatment of emotional difficulties, where she apparently experienced increasing distress about what had occurred. Her attorney contacted authorities, and Rachel provided a detailed account of what had happened that night. According to Rachel's confession, she and Sheila had picked up Skylar, as they told investigators, but instead of driving around town, they had taken her to a remote wooded area in Pennsylvania. Once there, on a prearranged signal, both girls attacked Skylar. The attack resulted in Skylar's passing, and the two then concealed her body in the woods. They returned home and began maintaining the fiction that they had simply dropped Skylar off. Rachel's confession led investigators to the location, where Skylar's remains were discovered in a wooded area in Greene County, Pennsylvania. Forensic examination confirmed her identity. The most shocking aspect emerged during interrogations. When asked why they had taken Skylar's life, Rachel stated that they simply no longer wanted to be friends with her. Investigators struggled to comprehend how such a seemingly minor social grievance could escalate to such extreme action. The investigation revealed tensions had developed within their friend group. Social media posts and text messages showed shifting dynamics, though nothing that would obviously predict such an outcome. Rachel Schauf entered a plea agreement in May 2013. She received a sentence of 30 years with eligibility for parole after 10 years. Her cooperation in locating Skylar's body and providing testimony were factors in the negotiated sentence. Shelia Eddy maintained her innocence for a longer period. Eventually, in January 2014, Shelia entered a guilty plea and received a sentence of life imprisonment with eligibility for parole after 15 years. Both remain incarcerated in West Virginia facilities. The case prompted the passage of Skylar's Law, which requires authorities to issue Amber Alerts more quickly when teenagers are reported missing. From a case motivated by social dynamics, attention shifts to another situation where academic pressure allegedly became a catalyst for extreme action. Willard Miller. On November 2nd, 2021, 66-year-old Nohema Graber, a Spanish teacher at Fairfield High School in Iowa, was reported missing when she failed to return home from her daily walk in a local park. Her van was found parked at the park, but there was no sign of her. The following day, her body was discovered concealed under a tarp, wheelbarrow, and railroad ties in a wooded area of the park. The investigation into her disappearance and passing would reveal a deeply troubling motive. Forensic examination indicated Nohema had been struck multiple times with a baseball bat, resulting in fatal head trauma. The deliberate concealment of her body suggested the perpetrator had attempted to delay discovery and possibly avoid detection. Investigators began examining her personal life and professional relationships to understand who might have targeted her and why. The investigation quickly focused on two of Nohema's students, 16-year-old Willard Miller and his classmate Jeremy Goodale, also 16. Digital evidence provided crucial leads, including social media communications between the two, discussing their frustration with a grade received in Nohema's class. Messages indicated they had been planning to confront her, though the extent of premeditation would become a key question in the legal proceedings. Surveillance footage and witness statements placed both youths in the area of the park around the time Nohema was known to have been there for her walk. Evidence collected from the scene and from items belonging to the two suspects provided forensic links connecting them to the location where Nohema's body was found. The baseball bat used in the attack was recovered, and analysis confirmed it had been used as the weapon. During interrogations, both Willard and Jeremy provided accounts of what occurred. Their statements indicated the incident had resulted from anger over a grade Nohema had given, which they felt was unfair. The grade reportedly had implications for academic standing or future opportunities, creating what they perceived as a serious grievance. However, investigators noted that many students faced disappointing grades without resorting to any form of confrontation, let alone what occurred in this case. The planning involved appeared to extend beyond a spontaneous confrontation. The choice of weapon, location, and concealment efforts all indicated some level of advanced thought. Both were tried as adults. Willard Miller entered a guilty plea and received a sentence of life imprisonment with possibility of parole after 35 years. Jeremy Goodale also received a life sentence with parole eligibility. Both remain incarcerated in Iowa facilities. Nohema Graber's family provided impact statements describing her dedication to teaching. The tragedy highlighted the vulnerability of educators. The case raised questions about academic pressure on young people and appropriate ways to handle disappointment. While Willard's case involved academic frustration, The next situation would reveal how online content could intersect with psychological vulnerability to create a dangerous belief system. Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier. On May 31, 2014, a bicyclist in Waukesha, Wisconsin, discovered a 12-year-old girl crawling along a roadside with severe injuries. The girl, Peyton Leutner, had sustained 19 stab wounds and was in critical condition. She was able to tell first responders that her friends had attacked her in nearby woods. The investigation that followed would reveal one of the most unusual motivations for an attack: an attempt to appease a fictional internet character. Peyton provided information identifying her attackers as Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier, both 12 years old and classmates of hers. Police located the two girls walking along a road several hours after the attack. When stopped and questioned, they acknowledged what they had done and explained they had been attempting to become proxies of an internet character called Slender Man by taking a life to prove their dedication to him. The investigation revealed that Morgan and Anissa had been extensively researching Slender Man, a fictional character that originated in online horror stories and had developed a cult following on certain internet forums. They had convinced themselves that Slender Man was real and that they needed to commit an act in his name to be accepted by him and avoid harm to themselves and their families. The degree to which they genuinely believed these delusions versus engaged in fantasy role-playing that escalated became a central question. The two had planned the attack in advance, luring Peyton to woods near their neighborhood. Once in an isolated area, they attacked her. After, they left Peyton and began walking toward what they believed was Slender Man's mansion, apparently intending to meet him. Remarkably, Peyton survived. She managed to crawl from the woods to the road where she was discovered, and emergency medical care saved her life. Her survival meant she could provide direct testimony. The legal proceedings involved complex questions about mental health. Psychiatric evaluations of Morgan Geyser revealed she had been experiencing symptoms of schizophrenia, including hallucinations and delusions. Mental health experts testified that her condition significantly impaired her ability to distinguish reality from fantasy. Anissa Weier's psychiatric evaluations indicated she had been influenced by Morgan's delusions. Experts described her as having been drawn into Morgan's delusional system through their friendship. Both were charged as adults initially. Anissa Weier received a sentence of 25 years in a mental health institution. She was released to supervised living in 2021. Morgan Geyser received a sentence of 40 years in a mental health institution. She has received ongoing psychiatric treatment. In November 2025, she petitioned for conditional release, which was granted. However, reports indicate her conditional release was subsequently revoked. Peyton's recovery has been remarkable, given the severity of her injuries. From a case rooted in internet mythology, the next situation would involve family dynamics and a history that complicated questions of responsibility and intervention. Christian Fernandez. In March 2011, emergency responders in Jacksonville, Florida, were called to a residence where a 2-year-old boy, David, had sustained severe head injuries. The injuries were initially attributed to a fall, but medical examination revealed the pattern of trauma was inconsistent with the explanation provided. As doctors worked to treat David, who ultimately did not survive his injuries, investigators began examining the circumstances more closely. Christian Fernandez, who was 12 years old, was David's older half-brother and had been providing care when the injuries occurred. When questioned, Christian's account of what happened changed multiple times. Medical experts testified that David's injuries suggested he had been struck or pushed with significant force, not simply fallen as initially claimed. The investigation expanded to examine the household environment and Christian's background. What emerged was a deeply troubling family history. Christian himself had been the victim of significant trauma throughout his life. including witnessing disturbing incidents and experiencing circumstances that child welfare experts described as profoundly damaging. His mother had her own history of challenges, and the household lacked stability and adequate supervision. Multiple agencies had been involved with the family over the years, though interventions had apparently been insufficient to prevent the tragedy. The question of Christian's intent became central to the legal proceedings. Prosecutors initially charged him with first-degree offenses, making him one of the youngest defendants in Florida history to face such serious charges. However, his attorneys argued that his own trauma history, developmental stage, and the circumstances of the incident should be considered. Defense experts testified about the effects of childhood trauma on brain development and impulse control. The case generated significant debate about how the justice system should respond to young offenders, who themselves have been victims of serious maltreatment. Child welfare advocates argued that Christian needed treatment and rehabilitation rather than punishment, while others contended that the severity of David's injuries required accountability. The tension between these perspectives shaped the proceedings. Ultimately, Christian entered a plea agreement to reduced charges of manslaughter, rather than proceeding to trial on the original charges. Under the agreement, he received juvenile sanctions rather than adult sentencing, acknowledging that while he bore responsibility for David's passing, his age and background warranted treatment within the juvenile system. He was placed in secure juvenile facilities where he could receive mental health services and education. Christian was released in January 2018 after completing his juvenile sentence, which included years in secure detention and transition programs. His release came with conditions including probation supervision, continued mental health treatment, and restrictions on his activities. The outcome reflected the juvenile justice system's emphasis on rehabilitation for young offenders, particularly those with significant trauma histories. The case highlighted systemic failures in child protection. Multiple opportunities to intervene with Christian's family had been missed or inadequately addressed by agencies meant to protect vulnerable individuals. Reforms were discussed regarding how to better identify and support families in crisis before tragedies occur. Christian's story illustrated the complex intersection of being both a victim and a perpetrator, raising difficult questions about responsibility, punishment, and the possibility of rehabilitation for young people who have experienced severe trauma. From a case involving extensive trauma history, the next situation would involve a teenager from an apparently stable family whose actions shocked everyone who knew the household. Nicholas Browning. On February 1, 2008, authorities in Cockeysville, Maryland responded to the Browning family home after concerned relatives requested a welfare check. Officers entering the residence discovered 4 family members deceased from gunshot wounds. John and Tamara Browning, along with their 2 younger sons Gregory and Benjamin, had all been shot while they slept. The sole surviving family member was their 15-year-old son Nicholas, who was not at the residence when police arrived. Nicholas was located several hours later and brought in for questioning. During interrogation, he confessed to shooting his family members with a handgun he had taken from his father's gun safe. His account indicated he had retrieved the weapon, entered each bedroom during the night, and shot each family member as they slept. He then left the residence and spent time with friends before police found him, apparently behaving normally and not indicating anything unusual had occurred. The investigation sought to understand what could have motivated such actions from a teenager with no obvious history of violent behavior or serious family conflict. Nicholas initially provided conflicting explanations for his actions. At various points, he suggested disputes over household rules, concerns about potential inheritance, and claims of family tensions. However, none of these explanations seemed proportionate to what had occurred, leaving investigators and later prosecutors searching for comprehensible motivation. Examination of the family's background revealed a household that appeared stable and functional to outsiders. John Browning worked in technology, and the family lived in a middle-class neighborhood with no obvious financial or social stressors. The younger brothers attended school regularly, and the family participated in community activities. Friends and neighbors expressed shock at what had occurred, stating they had observed no warning signs. Some testimony during legal proceedings suggested Nicholas had experienced conflicts with his parents over typical teenage issues such as curfews, academic expectations, and social privileges. However, witnesses described these as normal parent-teenager disagreements rather than severe dysfunction. Nicholas had claimed at times that he felt controlled or restricted, but the extent of any genuine problems versus typical adolescent perceptions of unfairness remained unclear. The question of premeditation was significant in the legal proceedings. The fact that Nicholas had to access a locked safe, retrieve the weapon, and then deliberately enter multiple rooms suggested this was not an impulsive act. His behavior after the incidents, including spending time with friends and maintaining a normal demeanor, indicated he was able to function and make decisions, which complicated any defense based on temporary impairment or psychological break. Psychiatric evaluations examined Nicholas's mental state, but did not identify severe mental illness that would explain his actions. Some experts testified about possible personality traits or thought patterns that might contribute to such extreme behavior. But the evaluations did not provide a clear psychological explanation that satisfied observers seeking to understand how this tragedy occurred. Nicholas was tried as an adult and convicted on 4 counts in 2009, receiving 4 life sentences with 2 to be served consecutively. The consecutive nature of 2 sentences means he must serve one completely before beginning the second, significantly extending the time before parole eligibility. He is currently incarcerated in Maryland and will become eligible for parole consideration in 2031. While Nicholas's case involved a seemingly conventional family, the final tragedy would stem from parental restrictions that a teenager found intolerable, leading to devastating consequences. Aaron Caffey. In the early morning hours of March 1st, 2008, emergency responders in Emory, Texas, arrived at a rural residence to find it engulfed in flames. As firefighters worked to control the blaze, they discovered 3 family members who had been shot and stabbed before the fire was set. Penny Caffey and 2 of her sons, Matthew and Tyler, had not survived the attack. Terry Caffey, the father and husband, managed to escape despite being shot multiple times and provided crucial information to investigators. Terry told authorities that intruders had invaded their home during the night, attacking the family while they slept. However, as investigators examined the evidence and interviewed witnesses, a disturbing picture emerged involving Terry's 16-year-old daughter, Erin, who had not been at the residence when the attack occurred. She had been staying with a friend that night, which initially seemed fortunate but raised questions as the investigation progressed. Evidence quickly pointed to Erin's boyfriend, Charlie Wilkinson, and his friend Charles Wade as the perpetrators of the attack. Both were apprehended, and during interrogations, they revealed that Erin had not only known about the plan, but had orchestrated it. She had allegedly wanted her family eliminated so she could be with Charlie without her parents' restrictions. The revelation that Erin had arranged for her own family's targeting devastated Terry, who was still recovering from his physical injuries. The investigation revealed escalating conflict between Erin and her parents over her relationship with Charlie. Terry and Penny Caffey had forbidden Erin from seeing Charlie. The parents maintained strict rules about dating. Erin had been frustrated by these restrictions. Forensic evidence indicated the attack had been planned with knowledge of the family's sleeping arrangements. Phone records showed communications between Erin and the perpetrators in the days leading up to the attack. Charlie Wilkinson and Charles Wade both faced separate trials and received life sentences. Erin Caffey was tried and convicted, receiving 2 life sentences plus additional time. She will not become eligible for parole until she is 59. Terry Caffey survived physically. Remarkably, he has publicly forgiven Erin and maintains contact with her. His faith has been central to his ability to process the tragedy. Erin remains incarcerated in Texas. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.